Welcome back to Mastering Pension Wealth podcast by Yemi Agbebi. I'm Elizabeth Harper, joined by Simon Clark. We're leading today with a tough question. Is the UK pension promise broken? What happened to Britain's retirement dream? And the big question we're wrestling with, will your state pension disappear altogether? Now, if you look back, 2005, the Pensions Commission, automatic enrolment was the big headline. Millions suddenly saving for retirement, and you'd be forgiven for thinking, problem solved. They were basically celebrating, weren't they, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. I remember that optimism. I actually started seeing more people working at my company finally talking about pensions, not just as some abstract future thing, but as something real. But, the system, it changed shape. Defined benefit, or DB pensions, those gold-plated plans where companies guarantee your retirement income, started to vanish. In came defined contribution, or DC schemes. That's when all the risks shifted to us, the individual savers. Look, this podcast isn't going to be just about dry figures and policy chat. Believe me, it's actually a story about, promises that hasn't been kept, about risks being shifted quietly but decidedly, and honestly about a nation that's kind of sleepwalking into retirement insecurity.
Oh, I know that risk all too well. I missed out on those lovely defined benefit schemes myself. I remember when I got my first "you've been auto-enrolled" email and thought, well, that's sorted. But you quickly realise, with defined contribution, unless you pay attention and bump your contributions up, you can easily drift. Nobody's promising you a guaranteed pot at the end, not anymore. It feels incredibly personal, this one. If you're under 50, the ground is shifting under your feet as we speak. If you're over 50, this whole situation might already be defining your future.
And it's gotten so much trickier since then. We need to get to grips with how the UK's retirement landscape has changed, subtly in some ways, dramatically in others, and why that sort of bedrock promise of a dignified retirement, it isn't universal anymore. It's becoming increasingly conditional and selective. You've got to stay on it, upping your contributions, paying attention to fees, and being realistic about investment risks. Frankly, most people just kind of stick with the minimum.
Exactly. And really, it's only because I got close to the numbers and saw how slow my own pot was growing, especially after the financial crisis, that I realised, hang on, I've got to be more proactive. So I switched jobs for higher salaries, looked for employers with generous defined contribution pensions, and kept pushing my own contributions up. Not all smooth sailing, I admit, but, you adapt or fall behind.
Yet here we are 20 years later in 2025, and the government has quietly revived the exact same commission that was partly responsible for the current mess. So, what went wrong with the other two commissions? What did the first and second pension fixes miss? And I think that's the story for a lot of people, except, of course, some groups never even made it onto the boat, which seems like a huge oversight now, doesn't it? With the gig economy and everything, freelancing, contracting and self-employment are booming. That's a whole chunk of the workforce potentially heading for a really tough retirement. A massive blind spot. And it tells you who the system wasn't really designed for or who it failed to adapt to, which takes us straight to what's happening now with undersaving. So, here's the cold truth. In 2025, the Department for Work and Pensions found that nearly half of working adults, 15 million people, are undersaving for retirement. That's huge. Elizabeth, I don't think people realise how big that number actually is.
No, it's extraordinary, isn't it? The game changed for some, but for millions, it's like the door never opened. Automatic enrolment was a step in the right direction, but self-employed workers, for instance, were left out almost completely. Only 1 in 5 of them actually save into a pension, Simon. That's not even close to good enough.
Honestly, most people don't think about it, especially if you don't have a payroll department auto-deducting each month. I once exchanged notes with a Midlands couple, a teacher and her self-employed partner. She'd been auto-enrolled and kept at it, but he barely saved anything for years. It wasn't even on his radar until he was almost 50, and that's sort of the norm, not the exception.
You hear that everywhere, don't you? And then there's the gender gap. Women are coming into retirement with half the private pension wealth of men, sometimes even less, because, parenting career breaks, part-time work, not that it's a choice for most, and lower average pay. It just snowballs.
And let's not forget the ethnic disparities. Some groups are massively underrepresented. Only about a quarter of Pakistani and Bangladeshi workers save into a pension. It's really stark. Then there's young adults 18 to 21, just 21% if I've got it right. That's all the people who are saving. They're left out by most schemes, and by the time they do get in, they're starting way behind and missed the beneficial effects of year-on-year compound interests over the long time.
We hear how personal responsibility is the answer, but that only works if everyone gets the same start. Sometimes you just wish someone would say, look, we need a step change, a bolder fix. Not just do a bit more tinkering around the edges, but rethink how we share the retirement burden.
Well, to be honest, the earlier people get nudged into starting something, especially women, the self-employed young adults, the bigger the impact years down the line. Even with small amounts, compound interest can work its magic. But we've reached the point where the cracks in the system are too obvious to ignore. And now we've got the Commission back in the spotlight.
So the government's revived the Pensions Commission, headed by Baroness Drake, Sir Ian Cheshire and Professor Nick Pearce. It isn't just policy tinkering, is it, Simon? It feels like triage, emergency measures. Things have drifted so far that now they're asking, is the whole system sustainable, or do we need a near reset?
That's exactly it. This revival, it isn't just tweaking policy around the edges. The critics are framing it more like a warning shot, a real red flag. And it really forces us to ask that critical question. What happens when almost half the country isn't saving enough or maybe saving anything for retirement? The Commission's job is huge. They're supposed to look at long-term sustainability, address generational inequality, and, somehow rebuild trust. And meanwhile, employers are getting nervous, worried about higher contributions. Some pensioners are afraid the triple lock could be scrapped or means tested, which would be a massive shift for current retirees. So will it survive the next big financial storm?
It's such a pressure cooker, isn't it? But now the government's looking at bringing age increases forward so people are working even longer for potentially less security at the end. And that's precisely the context for Liz Kendall's comment back in July 2025. She said very directly, unless we act, tomorrow's pensioners will be poorer than today's. And alongside that, there's the state pension age itself. It's going up to 67, then 68 eventually, and potentially higher. Was that even baked in?
It's a minefield. There's the risk politicians just sort of, what's the phrase, kick the can down the road. Meanwhile, critics say the Commission won't be bold enough. Yet if nothing changes, more people will retire into poverty. The social contract, work, save, retire comfortably, starts falling apart. It's not just a worry for today's pensioners, it's also the whole next generation, looking at this with growing mistrust.
So the Commission reports in 2027. Big questions. Can they deliver real reform or just tweaks? Will younger generations ever really trust a system that currently often excludes them or asks them to contribute to something they fear won't be there for them? Will groups who've always been left out finally see justice? And maybe the biggest, will today's young people ever believe in pensions again? I find myself wondering about that a lot.
There's so much on the line, and not a lot of time left to fix it. We'll be watching carefully and, I hope, helping listeners figure out how to navigate whatever comes next. And maybe the most immediate question, will the triple lock survive the next big fiscal squeeze, or will it become a casualty of the very pressures it was meant to alleviate? And maybe the most provocative thought to leave you with based on everything we've discussed, will the next generation retire richer, or will they be seriously financially compromised in retirement?
That's all from us today. Simon, as always, it's a pleasure. And my sincere thanks to Yemi Agbaby, executive producer of this pivotal series on pensions and pension wealth. We'll be back soon, helping you grow your pension confidence and prepare, whatever the headlines may say.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Take care, everyone. And don't forget, ask the tough questions about your own pension. See you next time.